Gregory Baker was well known and liked in the small English town of Alton. He contracted polio as a child, and later in life, he was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, which left him physically disabled and mostly confined to his home. Despite the fact that Greg's health prevented him from participating in many activities, he made an effort to be involved in his church and community. He was able to live comfortably in the home he inherited from his mother, and on the modest income he earned tutoring math to local children, thanks to the assistance of local agency carers. Greg met Thelma Yvonne Purchase, a 42-year-old mother of 3, in 2005, who would become his new carer and possibly more, according to some of her co-workers. Thelma and her partner, Kelvin Amos, lived about 10 miles away in the Stoke-on-Trent area. When Kelvin and Thelma met through their children's school, they were both single parents. She moved in after they began dating to save him money on the costs of maintaining 2 homes. Kelvin thought Thelma and Greg were just good friends during that initial blissful phase, while maintaining her professionalism. Greg tutored Thelma's son, Lance, and Kelvin was understanding of her caregiving role, despite her frequent visits to Greg's home. The carer and her client's inappropriate behavior drew the attention of other agency employees. There was some disagreement about the nature of their relationship. Thelma claimed she and Greg had a father-daughter bond, but other accounts painted a very different picture. 2 carers said they saw Thelma sit on Greg's lap, cuddle him, and give him passionate kisses several times. And it was strongly implied that their love went beyond that of a father-daughter relationship. Andrea Stafford, Greg's close friend, was among those perplexed by their strange friendship. "I couldn't understand why Greg was getting involved with her because she wasn't his type at all," she explained. "I understand that opposites attract, but they wouldn't have anything to talk about because he was such an intellectual. I realized as time passed that Greg was feeling more than just getting to know his carer well. It was having an effect on his emotions, and he was becoming entangled in it. Greg was clearly developing feelings for Thelma, and she was enjoying the money and gifts he lavished on her. When Thelma was having trouble getting to work, she knew exactly which buttons to press and how to get Greg to assist her. He gave her £1,500 to assist her in purchasing a car. Andrea realized right away that Thelma was taking advantage of Greg. Nonetheless, she realized that such a warning would have no effect on Greg's growing obsession with his caretaker. Thelma's caregiver's salary was insufficient to support her, so she began looking for a higher-paying job. But because she didn't want to give up Greg's cash gifts, she continued to see him as a friend or lover rather than a carer. By 2006, Thelma and Kelvin's relationship had already begun to deteriorate. While Thelma continued to spend a significant amount of her time away from work with Greg, her son Lance became involved in criminal activities. He was expelled from school after it was discovered that he was using marijuana on school grounds. His behavior continued to deteriorate, causing conflict between Kelvin and Thelma. Thelma's behavior towards Kelvin at the time gave the impression that she simply wanted to get rid of him. Thelma was extremely self-centered, and her inability to obtain the luxuries she desired drove her insane. She didn't want to be with Kelvin, but she also didn't want to risk losing her house by breaking up with him. She could eventually get something if she kept up the charade of caring about Greg. However, it was impossible to predict how long Greg would live and, as a result, how long she would have to wait for the money. In light of these circumstances, Thelma had to make some decisions. She approached a local criminal and asked if they would be willing to murder Kelvin in order for her to keep the house. When they refused to carry out the hit, Thelma went to Plan B, calling the cops and accusing Kelvin of domestic assault. Of course, the police had to look into it, and Kelvin, who had been arrested numerous times before, was having difficulty. However, her accusations ended her relationship with Kelvin, who stayed on his property with his children. Thelma relocated to a nearby council house. She'd received £8,500 in back pay from her employer and spent it all on turning her house into a showpiece. But she continued to see Greg until 2007, when he revealed what she had been hoping to hear all along. Greg changed the beneficiaries in his will to include Thelma and his best friend Andrea. That meant that if he died, They would each receive a portion of the £75,000 he had stashed away in the cottage, with Thelma expected to receive the lion's share, roughly £60,000. Andrea was surprised because Greg had told her about the will on one of the rare occasions when they were both present at his house. She believed he had not known Thelma long enough for her to inherit a sizable portion of his estate. When Thelma found out about the new will, she decided she couldn't wait until Greg's natural life was over to get her hands on his money. He needed to die sooner. Even though she was cold-blooded, Thelma realized she couldn't murder him. That's when she turned to her 19-year-old son, Lance. He then approached his friends and asked if they would be willing to kill for £8,000. Shane Edge, a 19-year-old friend, agreed right away. So, over a family barbecue, Thelma and the two young men plotted the murder of Greg Baker, 61. Greg, who could only get around with the assistance of his carers, had a strict daily schedule that Thelma was well aware of. He had his caretaker withdraw £500 from his bank account, as he does every Friday. He'd put the money in his pajamas' top pocket and go to bed. The money can then be used to pay his carers and buy whatever groceries or sundries he needs for the week. Greg would be assisted into bed by his carers every night at the same time, and rather than giving each of them a set of keys to his house that could easily go missing, he simply leaves the door unlocked at night so that his carers and neighbors could easily access his home in case of an emergency. This made it simple for the three of them to plan the murder. On Thelma's 44th birthday, June 5, 2007, Greg had one of his carers go out and buy her an expensive bottle of perfume. He had no idea she was planning to murder him that night. Thelma parked her car a few blocks away from Greg's cottage and watched the young men walk there. Both men entered the house through the unlocked door and proceeded up the stairs to Greg's room. Shane removed the pillow from under his head and placed it over his face as he sat on his chest, forcing air from his lungs. "Why are you attempting to murder me?" was Greg's final question before passing away. Shane took £500 from Greg's pajama pockets after confirming Greg's death, and then walked out with the pillow. Shane's sneakers, shirt, and the pillow he'd used to suffocate Greg in her backyard garden were all burned by Thelma. Greg Baker's care worker arrived on time the next day to assist him in getting out of bed and making breakfast. Greg appeared to be sleeping soundly when he entered the room through the unlocked door, but after the carer failed to wake him, he concluded that his client had died during the night and summoned an ambulance. The care agency informed their personnel of the tragic news, and word spread throughout the small community, but there was nothing unusual about the death of a severely disabled man. Greg was initially thought to have died naturally, but when the police were called, it was quickly determined that he had been suffocated. Police began investigating Greg's murder after the medical examiner determined the cause of death. A burglary was the most obvious explanation for the incident. This was quickly disproved because the TV, stereo, and other valuable items were not disturbed, despite the fact that £500 was stolen from his pajamas. The investigation team considered who might benefit from Greg's death. The police had two prime suspects, Greg's friends Andrea and Thelma, based on the updated will. "I remember when the detectives, the police knocked on my door and asked me about the murder," Andrea later recalled. "It was quite traumatic for me because I knew Greg had told me about his will some time ago. And I knew I was a lucky recipient. I had no idea what consequences that would have, which is why I had to be questioned in order to be removed from the investigations." Soon after, Thelma was named as the primary suspect. She claimed she was at home on the night Greg was murdered and thus was not involved. Her car, which Greg had purchased for her, had been parked in the driveway all night, according to Thelma. The police were able to quickly provide CCTV footage of her car at various points along its route to Alton, indicating that it was not a complicated or well-planned murder. It was easy to spot thanks to two stickers on the back window. Furthermore, Thelma's phone location could be verified using mobile data because it would take the same route as the car. After seeing this evidence, Thelma changed her story. She claimed this time that her son Lance and his friend Shane had borrowed her car to visit a local drug dealer. She claimed she forgot her phone in the car and didn't realize it was missing until the next morning, when she discovered it on her doorstep. She claimed that the two men had left it in the letterbox after returning the car early in the morning. Despite her claims of innocence, the authorities were not convinced. Not least because she had the most to gain from the crime and the investigation was still ongoing. Finally, a cop noticed a small burn mark on a paving stone in Thelma's garden and used it as a lead to solve the case. He lifted the slab and discovered charred fabric that could have been a sneaker and a fragment of material that could have been a feather but was otherwise unrecognizable. A specialist at the London Natural History Museum confirmed it was a feather, not just any feather, but the kind used in high-end bedding. They determined which of the area's feather pillow suppliers produced the missing pillow associated with Greg Baker's death by identifying the feather's origin. Lance and Shane were also seen on video visiting a gas station very early in the morning, spending a lot of money on booze while Shane appeared to be barefoot. The police were getting closer to cracking the case when a well-known local felon provided crucial information. The informant confirmed that she saw Thelma, Lance, and Shane together on the night in question, confirming their worst fears, that Thelma had not acted alone. In addition, the informant revealed that Thelma had asked her to assassinate her ex-partner, Kelvin Amos, in exchange for money. Following a review of the evidence, the court decided to charge 45-year-old Thelma Purchase, 20-year-old Lance Rudge, and 21-year-old Shane Edge with murder in the death of Greg Baker. Throughout the trial, Thelma maintained her innocence and blamed the murder on her son Lance, who refused to testify, and Shane, who claimed he had nothing to do with it. Despite this, Thelma, Shane, and Lance were all found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison for minimum terms of 30, 20, and 18 years, respectively. Thelma was dissatisfied with her sentence and filed an appeal in 2009, claiming that it was excessive in comparison to Shane and Lance's. Lord Justice Hughes dismissed the appeal, saying the sentence was richly deserved. Lance Rudge was interviewed from his jail cell for the documentary series Lifers on Channel 4 in 2012. "In here, you've got everything," he told the camera crew. "You have a stereo, a television, and food. Every day, there are 3 meals. I've got a good one. I don't want anything to change." When asked what he thought life was like outside, he responded, "Horrible, a nightmare to get a job. I don't want to be out there right now. I'd rather stay inside for a while. And then wait for it to calm down." When asked how he felt about his mother trying to absolve herself of responsibility, Lance replied, "When my mum was in court, and she blamed me, I saw for myself how evil women can be. I jumped across the court and attempted to hit her on the head." Lance further emphasized that, other than this, he regarded the entire trial as dull. He added, "I fell asleep 5 times. It wasn't really the best impression to make, but I couldn't help it. When I got sentenced, I almost collapsed, but now I don't even think about it. Time flies by." What are your thoughts on the Thelma Yvonne Purchase's case? I really appreciate your input. Thank you for taking the time to watch. Be a part of the Chris Crime Diaries family and hit the subscribe button now.